Captain Marcus Rodriguez had seen many storms during his 10 years in the Army, but nothing like the blizzard that was now pounding the Rocky Mountains. The snow fell so hard he could barely see 5 feet in front of his military jeep. He was supposed to be at the training facility 2 hours ago, but the GPS had stopped working miles back, and now he was completely lost. The wind howled like a wild animal, shaking his vehicle as he crawled along what he hoped was still a road. His fuel gauge showed nearly empty, and the heater was struggling against the bitter cold seeping through every crack. Marcus knew he was in serious trouble. Through the swirling white chaos, he spotted a dark shape ahead. As he got closer, he could make out the outline of a small log cabin tucked between tall pine trees. Smoke was rising from the chimney, which meant someone was inside. Marcus said a quick prayer of thanks and pulled his jeep as close to the cabin as possible. He grabbed his emergency pack and ran through the knee-deep snow to the front door. His hands were so cold he could barely knock, but he managed to bang on the wooden door several times. After what felt like forever, the door opened. Standing there was a woman in her early 30s with shoulder-length dark hair and intelligent green eyes. She wore a thick sweater and looked just as surprised to see him as he was to see her. Behind her, Marcus could see a cozy interior with a crackling fireplace. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she asked, immediately stepping aside to let him in. "You look half frozen." Marcus stumbled inside, grateful to escape the wind. "Thank you so much. I'm Captain Marcus Rodriguez. I got lost in this storm, and my jeep is almost out of gas." The woman closed the door behind him and studied his face with concern. "I'm Sarah Chen. You're lucky you found this place. That storm is getting worse by the minute." As Marcus looked around the cabin, he noticed it was well furnished but clearly meant for short stays. There were business papers scattered on a small table, and a laptop sat open nearby. Sarah didn't look like someone who lived in the mountains. "Are you staying here alone?" Marcus asked, still shivering, despite the warmth from the fireplace. Sarah nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm the CEO of Tech Vision Solutions. I came up here for a weekend retreat to work on some important presentations. I never expected weather like this." 2. Marcus had heard of Tech Vision Solutions. It was one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. He was surprised that someone so successful would be alone in a remote cabin during a dangerous storm. "My phone has no signal," Sarah continued, "and the landline went dead about an hour ago. I was starting to get worried when you knocked." Marcus checked his own phone and found the same problem. No bars, no connection to the outside world. He walked to the window and looked out at his jeep, which was already half buried in snow. "I don't think anyone is going anywhere until this storm passes," he said. "The weather report this morning said it could last until tomorrow night." Sarah's eyes widened. "Tomorrow night? But I have a board meeting on Monday morning. Some very important investors are flying in from Japan. I'm supposed to lead a training exercise at dawn," Marcus replied. "But it looks like we're both stuck here for now." The reality of their situation began to sink in. 2 complete strangers, trapped together in a small cabin with no way to communicate with the outside world. Marcus could see that Sarah was trying to stay calm, but he noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "Have you been here before?" Marcus asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "No. This is my first time. A friend recommended it as a quiet place to think and work. She said it was peaceful." Sarah gave a nervous laugh. She didn't mention anything about blizzards. Marcus smiled for the first time since the storm began. "Well, at least there's a fireplace, and what looks like enough wood to keep us warm." They both turned to look at the small pile of logs next to the fireplace. It would last through the night, but probably not much longer than that. "There's more wood on the back porch," Sarah said, "but I'm not sure how we'll get to it if this snow keeps piling up." As if to emphasize her point, a strong gust of wind shook the entire cabin. The lights flickered for a moment, and both Marcus and Sarah held their breath until they stayed on. "We should probably take inventory of what supplies we have," Marcus suggested. His military training was kicking in, and he felt better when he had a plan. Sarah nodded and led him to the small kitchen area. She opened the refrigerator and cabinets, showing him what was available. There were enough canned goods and dried food to last several days, plus bottled water and some basic first aid supplies. Whoever owns this cabin knows how to prepare for emergencies, Marcus observed. That would be my friend Lisa, Sarah said. She's a doctor, and she's always thinking ahead about safety. They continued exploring the cabin together. There was one bedroom with a double bed, a small bathroom, and the main living area with the fireplace and kitchen. It was cozy but definitely designed for one or two people who knew each other well. I'll take the couch, Marcus said quickly when they both realized there was only one bed. Are you sure? You're taller than me. The bed might be more comfortable for you. I've slept in much worse places, trust me, Marcus replied. The couch will be fine. As the evening wore on, they found themselves talking more easily. Sarah made hot chocolate, using packets she found in the kitchen, and Marcus built up the fire to keep the cabin warm. Despite the strange circumstances, they were both starting to relax. So what kind of training were you heading to? Sarah asked as they sat near the fireplace. Survival training, actually, Marcus said with a slight smile. Teaching new recruits how to handle emergency situations in harsh conditions. Well, this certainly qualifies as practice, Sarah laughed. What's the first rule of survival? Stay calm, assess your resources, make a plan, Marcus recited. And always look out for your team. Sarah studied his face in the firelight. He had strong features and dark eyes that seemed both serious and kind. There was something reassuring about having him there, even though they'd just met. What about you? Marcus asked. How did you end up running a tech company? Sarah's expression grew more animated as she talked about her work. She had started TechVision 5 years ago after leaving a big corporate job. The company developed software solutions for small businesses, and they had just landed their biggest contract ever with a major retailer. That's why this board meeting is so important, she explained. If everything goes well, we could expand internationally. Sounds like a lot of pressure, Marcus observed. It is, but I love it. Building something from nothing, solving problems, helping other businesses succeed. It's worth the stress. Marcus admired her passion and drive. He could see why she had been successful. But he also noticed the tension in her shoulders and the way she occasionally glanced at her silent phone. By 10 o'clock, the storm was still raging outside. The wind had only gotten stronger, and the snow was now covering the lower half of the cabin's windows. Marcus went to check on his Jeep and found it completely buried. We're definitely not going anywhere tonight, he announced when he came back inside. Sarah was trying to get a signal on her laptop, moving it around the cabin and holding it up toward the windows. Nothing, she said with frustration. I've never been this cut off from the world. Sometimes that's not such a bad thing, Marcus said gently. Sarah looked at him with surprise. How can you say that? Don't you need to check in with your commanding officer or something? I do, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. Worrying won't change the situation. Sarah sat down heavily on the couch. I'm not good at being out of control. In my business, there's always something you can do. Someone you can call. A problem you can solve. But right now, the problem is being solved, Marcus pointed out. We have shelter, food, heat, and safety. Sometimes the best thing you can do is accept what you can't change and focus on what you can. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering his words. She realized that despite the stressful situation, she felt oddly peaceful sitting by the fire with this calm, steady man she had just met. You're right, she finally said. I guess I'm just not used to slowing down. When was the last time you took a real break? Marcus asked. Sarah thought about it and realized she couldn't remember. Even her weekends were filled with work calls and emails. This forced pause in her schedule was probably the first real downtime she'd had in months. As the night got later, they continued talking about their lives, their families, and their dreams. Marcus told her about growing up in Texas and why he had joined the army. Sarah shared stories about starting her company and the challenges she had faced as a young female entrepreneur. Despite coming from completely different worlds, they found they had more in common than expected. Both were driven, ambitious people who took their responsibilities seriously. Both had made sacrifices to pursue their careers, and both were beginning to realize how isolated their busy lives had made them. Around midnight, Marcus noticed Sarah was starting to shiver despite the fire. "Are you cold?" he asked. "A little. I think the temperature is dropping, and the wind is getting through somewhere. And our men, and our men." Marcus got up and checked the windows and door frames. He found several small gaps where cold air was seeping in. "The cabin is well built, but this is an unusual storm. We need to conserve as much heat as possible." He gathered some towels and small rugs to stuff in the gaps, but it only helped a little. The fire was burning well, but the cabin was still getting colder as the night went on. "We might need to sleep close to the fireplace," Marcus suggested. "Body heat is one of the most efficient ways to stay warm." Sarah nodded, understanding the practical nature of his suggestion. But she still felt nervous about the implications. She barely knew this man, and now they were going to have to share space to survive the night. Marcus seemed to sense her hesitation. "I'll stay on the far side of the room if you prefer, but if it gets much colder, we might not have a choice." Sarah looked out at the storm still battering the cabin and made her decision. "No. You're right. We need to be practical about this." They arranged the couch cushions and blankets on the floor near the fireplace, creating a makeshift sleeping area that would be warmer than either the bedroom or the couch. Marcus added another log to the fire and banked it carefully so it would burn slowly through the night. As they settled down to sleep, both were acutely aware of each other's presence. The cabin felt smaller and more intimate in the darkness, with only the flickering light from the dying fire illuminating their faces. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly into the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you for showing up tonight. I don't know what I would have done alone in this storm." "Thank you for letting me in," he replied. "I don't want to think about what would have happened if I hadn't found this place." Neither of them slept easily that first night. The storm continued to rage outside. The cabin creaked and groaned in the wind, and they were both very aware that they were lying just a few feet apart, two strangers brought together by chance and held together by necessity. But as the hours passed and the fire burned lower, they both began to realize that maybe getting stranded together wasn't the disaster they had first thought it would be. Sarah woke up shivering in the early morning light. The fire had died down to just glowing embers, and her breath was visible in the cold air of the cabin. She could hear Marcus moving around quietly, trying not to wake her as he rebuilt the fire. "Good morning," she whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "Morning," Marcus replied, focused on getting the flames going again. The temperature dropped a lot during the night. "The storm is still going strong." Sarah sat up and looked out the window. The world outside was completely white, with snow still falling steadily. The wind had calmed down some, but she could tell they weren't going anywhere today either. "How did you sleep?" she asked. Marcus smiled slightly. "Better than I expected, considering." "You?" "Same, actually." Sarah was surprised to realize this was true. Despite the unusual circumstances, she had felt safe and warm enough to get some real rest. They worked together to prepare breakfast using the supplies in the cabin. Marcus made coffee, while Sarah found oatmeal and canned fruit. As they ate by the renewed fire, the situation felt more comfortable and less awkward than it had the night before. "So, what's your normal routine?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about his life. "Up at 5:30, physical training, breakfast with my unit, then whatever training or missions are scheduled for the day." "Pretty structured, compared to this," Marcus gestured around the cabin. "Mine's not much different. Just replace physical training with checking emails." Sarah laughed. "I'm usually in the office by 7 and rarely leave before 9 at night. Do you enjoy it?" Sarah paused, considering the question seriously. "I love the work itself, building the company, solving problems, but I guess I don't really think about enjoying it day to day. It's more about achieving goals and meeting expectations. Whose expectations? Marcus asked quietly. Mine, mostly. My team's. The investors. My family expects me to be successful because I always have been. Sarah realized she had never really thought about this question before. What about you? Do you enjoy the army? I do. I like the purpose. The clarity of mission. Working with good people toward common goals. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have more flexibility. To make decisions without having to consider military regulations and chain of command. They were both discovering things about themselves they hadn't expected, prompted by questions they rarely had time to consider in their busy, normal lives. As the day wore on, they explored more of the cabin and worked together to make their temporary home more comfortable. Marcus found additional blankets in a closet, and Sarah discovered a shelf of books and board games that the cabin's owner had left for guests. Scrabble? Sarah suggested, holding up the box. Sure, but I should warn you. I'm pretty competitive, Marcus said with a grin. Oh, really? Well, I didn't build a successful company by backing down from challenges. They set up the game on the floor near the fire, and what started as friendly competition quickly became an intense battle of wits. Sarah was amazed by Marcus's vocabulary, and he was impressed by her strategic thinking. Where did you learn to play like this? Marcus asked after Sarah played a triple word score that put her significantly ahead. Family game nights growing up. My parents were both professors, and they made sure my brother and I could hold our own in any intellectual competition. Sarah arranged her tiles thoughtfully. What about you? You're giving me a real fight here. Reading. I've always loved books, and the Army has given me access to libraries all over the world. Plus, long deployments give you a lot of time to expand your vocabulary. As they played, they continued talking about their backgrounds, their dreams, and their fears. Neither was used to opening up to strangers, but the isolation of the cabin seemed to create a space where normal social barriers didn't apply. Can I ask you something? Sarah said as she contemplated her next move. Shoot. Do you ever think about what you'll do after the army? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. I've been thinking about it more lately, actually. I love serving my country. But I also wonder what it would be like to have a different kind of life. Maybe start a business? Settle down somewhere? Have a family? What kind of business? Security consulting, maybe. Or outdoor education. Teaching people survival skills and wilderness safety. Marcus placed his tiles carefully. I've always been good at helping people prepare for challenges. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. You have a way of making people feel safe and capable. Is that how you feel right now? Marcus asked, looking at her directly for the first time since they'd started playing. Sarah met his gaze and realized it was true. Despite being stranded in a storm with a complete stranger, she felt calmer and more secure than she had in months. Yes. Actually, I do. The afternoon passed quickly as they continued their game and conversations. When evening came, they prepared dinner together, and Sarah was struck by how naturally they worked as a team. Marcus was considerate and helpful without being overbearing, and he seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. You know, Sarah said as they sat down to eat, this is the most relaxed I've felt in a very long time. Even though you're stuck in a cabin during a blizzard with a stranger? Marcus asked with amusement. Maybe because of it, Sarah replied thoughtfully. I can't check email. I can't make phone calls. I can't control anything about my business. For the first time in years, I have to just be present in the moment. How does that feel? Scary, Sarah admitted. But also, kind of wonderful. Marcus understood exactly what she meant. His military life was highly scheduled and regulated, with little time for spontaneous conversation or getting to know someone slowly and naturally. This forced pause felt like a gift, even though it had started as an emergency. As the second night fell, they were both more comfortable with their sleeping arrangements near the fireplace. The cabin was warmer than it had been the night before, and they had arranged their blankets and pillows to create a cozy space that felt less awkward and more like a camping adventure. Sarah, Marcus said as they were settling down to sleep. Yes? Can I ask you something personal? Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but she trusted him enough to answer. Are you happy? I mean, really happy with your life? The question caught Sarah off guard. She was used to people asking about her success, her achievements, her plans for the future, but no one had asked about her happiness in a long time. I thought I was, she said slowly. I have everything I thought I wanted. But sitting here talking with you, I realize I've been so focused on building my career that I forgot to build other parts of my life. Like what? Friendships, relationships, hobbies that have nothing to do with work. When was the last time I had a conversation like the ones we've been having? When was the last time I played a board game or sat by a fire just because it felt good? Marcus nodded in understanding. I know what you mean. The army gives me purpose and structure. But sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's definition of success, instead of figuring out what would actually make me happy. What do you think would make you happy? Sarah asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire. Connection, I think. Real relationships with people who matter to me. Work that feels meaningful, but doesn't consume every hour of my day. Maybe a family someday. If I can find someone who understands the kind of person I am. What kind of person are you? Loyal? Protective? Maybe a little too serious sometimes. I like taking care of people. But I also need someone who can challenge me and make me think about things differently. Marcus glanced at her. What about you? What would make you happy? Sarah considered the question seriously. Balance, I think. I love my work, but I want it to be part of my life. Not all of it. I want relationships that aren't just networking opportunities. I want to feel like I'm building something meaningful, not just profitable. It sounds like you're already building something meaningful with your company, Marcus observed. Maybe. But I want my personal life to be meaningful too. I want someone to share successes and failures with. Someone who sees me as more than just the CEO of Tech Vision Solutions. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, both thinking about the unexpected turn their conversation had taken. The storm outside seemed less threatening now, more like a protective barrier that was giving them space to explore thoughts and feelings they rarely had time to examine. Marcus, Sarah said softly. Yeah? I'm glad we're stranded together. Marcus turned to look at her, seeing her face illuminated by the firelight. Me too. The admission hung in the air between them, acknowledging that something was happening that neither of them had expected. They were not just two people waiting out a storm anymore. They were two people discovering that sometimes the best connections happen when you least expect them. We should probably try to get some sleep, Marcus said, though he didn't sound like he really wanted the conversation to end. Probably, Sarah agreed, but she also made no move to turn away from him. They continued talking quietly as the fire died down, sharing stories from their childhoods, discussing books they had both read, and laughing about embarrassing moments from their careers. The conversation felt easy and natural, like they had known each other for years instead of just 2 days. Eventually, exhaustion overtook them both, and they drifted off to sleep lying closer together than they had the night before. Neither mentioned it, but both were acutely aware of the warmth and comfort of having someone nearby in the isolated cabin. When Sarah woke up in the middle of the night feeling cold, she found herself naturally moving closer to Marcus's warmth. When Marcus woke up and realized Sarah was shivering in her sleep, he carefully adjusted his blanket to cover them both more effectively. Neither was fully awake for these adjustments, but both registered the comfort and safety of not being alone. For two people who were used to being strong and independent, the simple human warmth and connection felt surprisingly powerful. As the night wore on and the storm continued outside, Sarah and Marcus slept more peacefully than either had in months, held safe not just by the cabin walls, but by the unexpected trust and growing affection they had found in each other. On the third morning, Sarah woke up to find herself curled up against Marcus's side, his arm around her shoulders. For a moment, she was startled, but then she realized how naturally they had moved together during the night for warmth and comfort. Marcus was still asleep, breathing peacefully, and Sarah felt a strange sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. She stayed still for a few minutes, not wanting to wake him and break the peaceful moment. Outside, she could see that the snow had finally stopped falling, though the world was still buried under several feet of white. The storm that had brought them together was finally ending. Marcus stirred and opened his eyes, immediately aware of how close they were lying. "Good morning," he said softly, not moving away. "Good morning," Sarah replied, equally soft. "I think the storm is over." They both looked toward the window, seeing clear skies for the first time in 3 days. The sight should have been a relief, a sign that they would soon be able to return to their normal lives. Instead, both felt a strange sadness at the thought of their time together ending. "I should check if my Jeep will start," Marcus said, though he made no immediate move to get up. "And I should see if my phone has signal yet," Sarah added, also staying exactly where she was. They remained lying together for several more minutes, both reluctant to take the steps that would begin the process of returning to the outside world. The cabin had become a sanctuary where they had discovered sides of themselves they had forgotten existed. Finally, Marcus sat up and began rebuilding the fire. "We should probably eat breakfast and then assess our situation," he said, slipping back into the practical mindset that had served him well in the army. Sarah nodded and got up to help prepare their meal. As they worked together in the kitchen, both were unusually quiet, lost in their own thoughts about what would happen next. "Sarah," Marcus said as they sat down with their coffee and oatmeal. "Yes? What happens when we leave here?" The question Sarah had been trying not to think about was now out in the open. She looked at Marcus's serious face and realized she had no idea how to answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "I live in San Francisco. You're stationed in Colorado. We have completely different lives. But these past 3 days have been amazing," Sarah finished. "Unexpected, wonderful, and amazing." Marcus reached across the small table and took her hand. "I don't want this to be just a story we tell about the time we got snowed in together." Sarah felt her heart rate increase at his touch and the intensity in his voice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think I'm falling for you, and I have no idea what to do about it." The honest admission took Sarah's breath away. She had been feeling the same thing but hadn't dared to put it into words. In 3 days, this man had seen sides of her that even her closest friends didn't know existed. He had made her feel safe, challenged her thinking, and reminded her what it was like to simply enjoy someone's company without any agenda or expectations. "I'm falling for you too," she said quietly. "But that scares me." "Why?" "Because I don't know how to fit something like this into my life. My schedule, my responsibilities, my 5-year plan, none of it has room for a relationship with an army captain who lives 600 miles away." Marcus understood her practical concerns, but he also knew that what had happened between them in the cabin was rare and precious. "What if we figure it out as we go? What if we don't have to have all the answers right now?" Sarah looked at him across the table. Seeing the hope and sincerity in his eyes, she realized that for someone who prided herself on careful planning and calculated risks, falling for Marcus Rodriguez was the most impulsive thing she had ever considered doing. "You really think we could make this work?" she asked. "I think we owe it to ourselves to try," Marcus replied. "I've never connected with someone the way I have with you." "Have you?" Sarah shook her head. "Never. Not even close." They spent the rest of the morning talking seriously about the practical aspects of pursuing a relationship. Marcus had been considering leaving the army when his current commitment ended in 8 months. Sarah realized her company was successful enough that she could delegate more responsibilities and create more flexibility in her schedule. "I could visit you in San Francisco," Marcus suggested. "And maybe you could come to Colorado sometimes. We could see how it feels in the real world." "What if it doesn't work?" Sarah asked. "What if this was just cabin fever or some kind of survival bonding that won't translate to normal life? Then at least we'll know we tried," Marcus said. "But Sarah, do you really think this is just cabin fever?" Sarah looked at him carefully, considering everything they had shared over the past 3 days. The conversations, the laughter, the way he listened to her and challenged her thinking, the sense of safety and excitement she felt in his presence. None of that felt temporary or situational. "No," she said finally. Around noon, they heard the sound of a snowplow working its way up the mountain road. Both felt a mixture of relief and sadness, knowing that rescue was coming, but their time together in the cabin was ending. Marcus went outside to dig out his Jeep, while Sarah gathered her belongings and tried to process everything that had happened. When she checked her phone, she found dozens of missed calls and messages from her assistant, her investors, and her board members. The business world had continued spinning without her, and people were worried about her absence. But as she scrolled through the urgent emails and voice messages, Sarah realized something important. The company had survived 3 days without her constant attention. Her capable team had handled the immediate issues, and the world had not ended because she was unreachable for a weekend. Marcus came back inside, stomping snow off his boots. "The Jeep starts, and the road should be passable in a couple of hours once the plow finishes." "That's good," Sarah said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "Sarah, before we leave here, I need to ask you something." She looked up from her phone, giving him her full attention. Marcus walked over and sat beside her on the couch. "Last night, when you were cold, you moved closer to me, and I pulled the blanket over both of us to keep you warm." Sarah nodded, remembering the comfortable warmth of sleeping close to him. "Mind if I get under your blanket?" Marcus asked with a gentle smile, echoing the question he had been too polite to ask the first night. Sarah's heart melted at the sweet callback to their cautious beginning. So much had changed since then. Now, instead of being strangers sharing space out of necessity, they were two people who had found something special and didn't want to let it go. "I would mind if you didn't," Sarah replied, opening the blanket to invite him in. Marcus moved closer and put his arms around her, and they sat together, wrapped in the blanket, looking out at the snow-covered landscape that had brought them together. "This is the last time we'll be alone like this," Sarah said softly. "It doesn't have to be," Marcus replied. "We can create more moments like this, just in different places. Promise me something," Sarah said, turning to look at him. "What?" "Promise me that we'll really try. Not just talk about trying, but actually make the effort to build something together." "I promise," Marcus said seriously. "But you have to promise me something too." "Okay. Promise me that you won't let fear or logistics or other people's expectations talk you out of this. Promise me that you'll trust what we found here, even when it gets complicated." Sarah thought about all the reasons why pursuing a relationship with Marcus was impractical and risky. She also thought about how alive and happy she had felt for the past 3 days, and how long it had been since she had felt that way about anything in her personal life. "I promise," she said, and sealed it with their first kiss. When they finally separated, both were smiling and slightly breathless. The kiss confirmed what they had both been feeling. This connection was real, powerful, and worth fighting for. The sound of the snowplow grew louder as it approached the cabin. Soon, they would have to leave their sanctuary and return to their separate lives. But they were no longer the same people who had been stranded there 3 days ago. Marcus had found someone who challenged his thinking and made him want to take risks for love. Sarah had discovered that success meant more than business achievements, and that the right person could make her want to create space for a relationship in her carefully planned life. As they packed their belongings and prepared to leave the cabin, they made concrete plans for Marcus to visit Sarah in San Francisco the following weekend. They exchanged detailed contact information and talked about how they would navigate the challenges of a long-distance relationship. "Are you nervous?" Marcus asked as they loaded their things into his newly freed Jeep. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "But also excited. I haven't felt this hopeful about anything personal in years." "Me neither," Marcus said, taking her hand. "But I think we can do this." They drove down the mountain together, with Marcus planning to take Sarah to the nearest airport so she could catch a flight back to San Francisco. The roads were clear, and the storm that had trapped them was just a memory marked by the deep snow covering everything in sight. As they reached the bottom of the mountain, and returned to areas with cell phone coverage. Both of their phones started buzzing with accumulated messages. The outside world was calling them back to their responsibilities and commitments. But neither felt the old urgency to immediately respond to every demand for their attention. The cabin had taught them both something important about balance, priorities, and what really mattered in life. 6 months later, Marcus submitted his papers to leave the Army, and Sarah opened a second office for Tech Vision Solutions in Denver. They had kept their promises to each other, navigating the challenges of distance, demanding careers, and learning to blend their very different lives. The cabin where they met became a special place they returned to regularly, sometimes for romantic weekends, sometimes for business retreats where Sarah could work, while Marcus planned his new security consulting business. And every time they visited, they remembered the storm that had brought them together and the moment when a simple question about sharing a blanket had changed both of their lives forever. A year later, when Marcus proposed to Sarah back in that same cabin, he asked the question that had started it all. "Mind if I get under your blanket? Mind if I get under your blanket?" But this time, he was asking if she would share all of her blankets and all of her life with him forever. Sarah's answer was the same as it had been that very first night when she opened her door to a stranger in a storm. "Yes, of course. Come in where it's warm."